Chapter 12. The American Covenant of 4 and 7, July 4th as a new sacred time. In Manuel Martinez's covenantal framework, the biblical structure based on 4 and 7 does not end with ancient Israel. It is reinterpreted and symbolically adopted by the founding fathers of the United States through the deliberate choice of July 4th as the nation's foundational date. This reading does not claim a secret treaty or an explicit declaration of covenant with God in biblical terms. Rather, it proposes that symbolic time was intentionally chosen to frame the birth of the nation. 1. The historical fact versus the symbolic choice. Documented history is clear. The Declaration of Independence was approved by the Continental Congress on July 4, 1776. It was signed primarily on August 2, 1776, with some signatures added later. Yet July 4th, not August 2nd, became the sacred civic date of the United States. This choice is not accidental in a symbolic reading. Nations are not founded on signatures alone, but on meaning. July 4th marks the decision, the proclamation, the spoken word, not the administrative act. In biblical terms, covenant begins not when ink dries, but when the word is declared. 2. July 4th and the logic of the number 4. In biblical symbolism, 4 represents the created world. 4 directions. 4 corners of the earth. The totality of the material realm. By choosing the 4th day as the nation's birth moment, the founders symbolically anchor the new polity in the world, not in monarchy, church hierarchy, or inherited throne. It is a declaration that authority arises from the people. Law operates within the created order. Power is exercised on earth, not by divine right of kings. This aligns with the Enlightenment vision of a worldly republic, yet still open to divine judgment. 3. July, the 7th month, and the logic of covenant. In biblical thought, 7 signifies completion, covenant, and sacred time. Creation week, Sabbath, Jubilee cycles. By placing independence in July, the 7th month, by the Roman calendar in use at the time, the founders framed the act as more than political rebellion. It becomes a moment of completion and separation. Symbolically, a cycle is closed. A new order begins. A people step into responsibility. Thus, 4, world, x7 covenant, mirrors the same numerical logic that underlies Martinez's biblical cycle theory. 4. The role of Masonic and Rosicrucian thought, historically cautious. It is historically documented that several founding fathers were Freemasons, including George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was deeply engaged with Enlightenment, esoteric, and symbolic traditions. Rosicrucian ideas circulated broadly in European intellectual circles, though formal membership is debated. Freemasonry of the 18th century emphasized symbolism, sacred geometry, numbers, and moral order. Sought to reconcile reason, natural law, and divine providence. Frequently used biblical imagery in non-dogmatic ways. Important distinction. There is no proof of a secret ritual declaring July 4th a covenant with God. But there is strong evidence that symbolic time, number, and ritual meaning mattered to these men. 5. A new covenant, not a theocracy. In Martinez's interpretation, the American covenant is not theological in the biblical sense, but civic and moral. It is a covenant, of law over monarchy, of responsibility over inheritance, of liberty under judgment, not liberty without limits. The Declaration itself invokes the laws of nature and of nature's God, a creator, a moral order beyond human authority. This language situates the United States under accountability, not divine entitlement. 6. Manifest destiny and the numbers 4 and 7. Within this symbolic framework, manifest destiny becomes the historical unfolding of the covenant. 4 to expansion across the physical land, continent, borders, territory. 7 to belief in purpose, mission, and moral justification. The danger and the test of such a covenant is clear. Expansion can become stewardship or domination. Chapter 13. The Biblical Theory of the Cycles of History, according to Manuel Martínez. Manuel Martínez proposes a new theory of historical cycles based on biblical numerology, specifically inspired by Genesis 47:11, a verse which, according to his interpretation, contains a covenantal structure founded on the numbers 4 and 7. In biblical tradition, 4 represents the created world, the cardinal points, the elements, material order, while 7 symbolizes divine fullness, covenant, and sacred time. Their multiplication constitutes the basic unit of historical rhythm. At the center of Martinez's theory lies the idea that history unfolds in nested cycles, each longer, heavier, and more decisive than the previous one. These cycles are not simple repetitions, but successive levels of fulfillment, where shorter cycles prepare the ground for more complex ones. The foundational unit, 4 times 7 equals 28 years. First cycle, 28 years. This is the shortest historical cycle in Martinez's model. It represents a generational adjustment cycle, commonly associated with political realignments, visible cultural changes, economic corrections, leadership transitions. It is a rapid, perceptible, and frequent cycle, in which societies adjust within a single generation. Second cycle, 4 by 7 times 2 equals 56 years. Dual cycle, 56 years. The second cycle doubles the foundational unit and spans approximately 2 generations. According to Martinez, this cycle corresponds to the rise and exhaustion of ideological movements, long periods of economic expansion followed by restructuring, the maturation and erosion of institutions. It is long enough for societies to forget the origin of their systems, but not long enough to escape their consequences. Third cycle, 4 by 7 times 3 equals 84 years. The covenant cycle, 84 years. This is the central and most complex cycle of Martinez's theory, and, according to his framework, the cycle humanity is currently experiencing. The 84-year cycle represents approximately the duration of a complete human life. The passage from collective memory to collective amnesia. The time required for a society to repeat its deepest moral and structural trials. Martinez argues that this cycle governs major wars and global crises, the rise and fall of political orders, the return of unresolved historical forces. Once the generation that lived through the previous crisis has disappeared, society faces similar challenges again without living memory, relying only on written records, often ignored. Fourth cycle, 4 by 7 times 4 equals 112 years. The judgment cycle, 112 years. This cycle transcends living memory and enters civilizational time. It is associated with the exhaustion or transformation of global systems. profound changes in dominant powers. Moral and spiritual depletion followed by renewal. Within Martinez's framework, few societies pass through this cycle without being radically transformed. Fifth and final cycle, 4 by 7 times 5 equals 140 years. The cycle of consummation, 140 years. The longest cycle is the cycle of closure and renewal. At 140 years, a number biblically associated with trial, exile, and fulfillment, Martinez identifies. The closure of historical processes begun generations earlier. The collapse or rebirth of civilizations. The sealing or renewal of historical covenants. This cycle does not reform history, it resets it. The meaning of Genesis 47:11 in the theory. In Martinez's interpretation, Genesis 47:11 symbolizes the ordering of land and people under a covenant, the alignment of material reality, 4, with divine order, 7, the beginning of structured time under responsibility and stewardship. From this point onward, history does not advance chaotically, but in measured stages, each accountable to the previous one. The following table is titled Summary of Types of Cycles per Categories. It can be described as follows. This table groups different cycle theories according to the category of phenomena they primarily describe. Each category highlights a different dimension of historical change, including social patterns, political structures, generational dynamics, and economic activity. First are sociological cycles. These cycles focus on patterns within societies, including changes in culture, institutions, and social organization over time. They examine how societies evolve, stabilize, and sometimes transform through recurring social dynamics. Second are historical recurrent cycles. These refer to the observation that certain historical patterns tend to repeat across different eras. Historians and theorists identify similar sequences of events, such as periods of expansion, conflict, and renewal, that appear throughout recorded history. Third are political or dynastic cycles. These cycles describe the rise, consolidation, decline, and replacement of ruling powers. A classic example is the Chinese dynastic cycle, where new dynasties emerge after periods of instability and eventually weaken before being replaced. Fourth are generational cycles. These cycles focus on the changing attitudes, values, and leadership styles of successive generations. Over time, generational turnover produces shifts in social mood, political priorities, and institutional strength. Finally, there are economic cycles, which describe recurring fluctuations in economic growth, production, investment, and innovation. These cycles can range from short-term business fluctuations to longer technological waves that reshape the structure of the economy. Together, these categories show that cycles appear in many different aspects of history: social, political, generational, and economic, and that each type of cycle offers a different perspective on how historical change unfolds. The table description has ended. Central idea, in a single sentence. History advances in covenant cycles of increasing weight, 28, 56, 84, 112, and 140 years, and each one reveals whether humanity has learned, forgotten, or rejected the lessons entrusted to it. 1. Direct comparison. Manuel Martínez versus Dalio versus Strauss, Howe versus Kondratiev. 1. Core view of history. Manuel Martínez. History is driven by covenant cycles based on biblical symbolism, 4 and 7, with growing moral and spiritual responsibility. Ray Dalio. History advances through debt, money, inequality, and power struggles. Strauss Howe. History changes through generational turnover and the loss of memory of past crises. Kondratiev, economic history advances in long technological waves. 2. Duration of cycles. Martinez, 28 to 56 to 84 to 112 minus 140 years. Dalio, 5 to 10 to 50 to 75, 250 years. Strauss-Howe, 80 to 90 years. Kondratiev, 40 to 60 years. Key observation. Martinez's central cycle, 84 years, nearly coincides with the Strauss-Howe saeculum, but its foundation is biblical and covenantal, not sociological. 3. Primary driver of historical change. Martinez, fulfillment or rupture of the covenant, moral order and spiritual memory. Dalio, excessive debt, inequality, and rivalry between powers. Strauss-Howe, generational turnover and historical amnesia. Kondratiev, exhaustion of a dominant technology. Martinez introduces a moral spiritual engine, absent from the other three models. 4. Internal structure of cycles. Martinez, correction to maturation to trial to judgment to consummation. Dalio, rise to debt to inequality to conflict to monetary collapse to replacement. Strauss-Howe, high to awakening to unraveling to crisis. Kondratiev, expansion to slowdown to crisis to technological renewal. 5. Meaning of crisis. Martinez, moral and covenantal reckoning. Dalio, reset of money, debt and global power. Strauss-Howe, social and institutional reconstruction. Kondratiev, economic adjustment and technological transition. For Martinez, crisis is not only economic or social, it is ethical and spiritual. 6. Historical scale. Martinez, human to national to civilizational. Dalio, empires and world order. Strauss-Howe, national societies. Kondratiev, global economy. 7. How the four models fit together. The models do not contradict one another, they operate on different layers. Kondratiev explains the economic pulse. Strauss-Howe explains social psychology. Dalio explains power, money, and geopolitics. Martinez explains moral meaning and covenant. In simple terms, Kondratiev explains how economies grow and exhaust themselves. Strauss-Howe explains how societies behave. Dalio explains who dominates and why they fall. Martinez explains why history is held to account. 8. Strengths and limits. Strengths. Integrates historical time with biblical ethics. Provides moral coherence to cyclical history. Limits. Not empirical in a strict academic sense. 9. Fundamental difference of Martinez's theory. While the other models ask, what was exhausted? What failed? Which cycle ended? Manuel Martinez's theory asks, was the covenant fulfilled or broken? In this vision, history does not merely repeat or rhyme, it responds. Each generation inherits a trial and leaves a testimony. Conclusion. The four theories describe the same historical movement from different levels. Economy, Kondratiev. Society, Strauss-Howe. Power, Dalio. Covenant and moral meaning, Martinez. Together, they form a complete map of historical time, where history does not merely change, it renders judgment.